Mark hadn't agreed to the date so much as drifted into it, the way a man steps into a river thinking it, shallow only to feel the current tug at his knees. His sister had called it coffee with a friend, said it casually, like an afterthought slipped into a conversation about school schedules and grocery lists. He would have said no if she'd called it a blind date. He always did, but coffee sounded manageable. Something he could fit between picking Noah up from soccer practice and reheating leftovers for dinner. The bell over the cafe door chimed as he walked in, bringing with it the smell of roasted beans and warm sugar. He scanned the room automatically, the habit of a single parent always aware of exits, of space, of who was around. Then he saw her by the window. She sat in a wheelchair angled slightly toward the glass, sunlight catching in her hair. For a split second his chest tightened. It wasn't disgust or judgment. He hated himself even for wondering. But panic, sharp and sudden. He had no script for this, no practiced politeness. His sister hadn't mentioned a wheelchair. His mind rushed ahead, tripping over questions he didn't want to ask and answers he didn't trust himself to give. Then she turned, caught his gaze, and smiled. It wasn't tentative or apologetic. It was open, warm, the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd been expected. She lifted a hand in a small wave. "Mark?" He nodded, already embarrassed at how long he'd hesitated. "Yeah, sorry, traffic," he said, defaulting to the oldest excuse in the book. "Elevators," she replied easily. "They make liars of us all." Her eyes sparkled with humor, not accusation. That broke the tension more than anything else could have. He laughed, surprised at the sound of it. "I'm guessing you're Lena." "In the flesh," she said. "Well, most of it." He winced internally, but she was already turning toward the counter. "Coffee, my treat since you survived the parking lot." They ordered, and Mark found himself talking too fast, filling the space with details he usually kept guarded. He told her about Noah without thinking, about how he insisted on wearing mismatched socks because dinosaurs didn't care about colors, about how he asked questions that cut straight through Mark's armor. Lena listened, chin resting lightly on her hand, eyes attentive in a way that made him slow down. "That's a good age," she said, "old enough to notice the world's cracks, young enough to believe they can be fixed." Mark swallowed. "Yeah, he believes that about me too." Their coffees arrived. Steam curled between them. The cafe hummed with quiet conversations, spoons clinking against porcelain, a soft acoustic song playing somewhere overhead. Mark noticed how Lena wrapped both hands around her mug, how her fingers trembled just slightly. She didn't hide it. She didn't apologize for it either. They talked about books. Next, how he'd fallen asleep reading the same chapter for weeks, too tired to remember the plot, and how she reread favorites because endings felt kinder when you knew them. They talked about terrible movies, the kind you watched just to yell at the screen. She had a quick wit, dry and observant, and when she laughed it wasn't careful or restrained. It was full, surprising him every time. At some point Mark realized his shoulders had dropped. The tight knot between his ribs had loosened. He wasn't performing. He wasn't bracing for rejection. He was just there, present in a way he hadn't been with another adult in years. That realization brought its own wave of guilt. He noticed the wheelchair again, not because she'd changed, but because he had. He hated the way his mind catalogued things, the way it wanted to make meaning out of her body before it made meaning out of her words. He hated that forgetting it felt like progress and remembering it felt like failure. Lena caught his glance, followed it down, then back up to his face. She didn't look offended. She looked knowing. "You don't have to pretend it's not there," she said gently. "People either stare or overcorrect. You're doing the second one." His ears burned. "I'm sorry, She lifted a hand. "It's okay. You're human. I'd be worried if you weren't a little awkward." That eased him more than reassurance ever could. They returned to their conversation, and Mark found himself asking questions, not about her chair, but about her job, her favorite places, the things she missed and the things she loved. She answered honestly, without drama, without polishing the edges. When the check came, Lena reached for it first. "I've got this." Mark shook his head instinctively. "No, I invited you. I mean, my sister did, but—" She arched an eyebrow, amused. "Mark!" "Right, sorry." He laughed at himself. then hesitated, feeling the weight of old habits. Let me. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but next time I'm paying. The word next time landed between them, small and electric. Mark felt something hopeful stir, something he'd kept buried for so long it startled him. They lingered after the cups were empty, neither rushing to leave. Outside, the light had shifted, afternoon sliding toward evening. Mark checked his watch and realized he still had time before he needed to get. Noah, for once, he didn't feel pulled in a dozen directions at once. As they stood, or rather as he stood, and she angled her chair back slightly, Mark felt the urge to say something more, to suggest another coffee. A walk, maybe, then immediately corrected himself, berating the thought before it formed fully. He opened his mouth anyway, heart pounding with a fear he recognized too well. Before he could speak, Lena looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," he said too quickly. She took a breath, her fingers tightening briefly on the armrest. "Before you decide if you want to see me again," she said softly, "there's something I think you should know." Mark nodded, unaware of how completely his life was about to shift, only knowing that whatever came next, this moment had already mattered more than he'd expected. They stayed where they were, the late afternoon light thinning into something softer, more fragile. Outside the cafe window, people passed by carrying groceries, laughing into phones, living ordinary lives that felt impossibly distant. Inside, the air seemed to tighten around them. Lena didn't rush. She adjusted her hands on the armrests of her chair, as if grounding herself. And Mark sensed that whatever she was about to say had been carried for a long time. "I wasn't always in a wheelchair," she began quietly. Mark didn't interrupt. He'd learned in the years since his wife's death that some truths needed space to breathe. "The accident was 6 years ago," Lena continued. "A drunk driver ran a red light. I remember the sound first, the metal folding in on itself. Then nothing. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize." Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers did, just barely. "They told me my spine was damaged. They told me I'd never walk again. And then they told me my fiancé didn't make it." Mark felt the words land in his chest like blunt force. The cafe noise faded into a dull hum. He knew that moment, the before and after, the way life split cleanly in two and never fit back together the same way. "We were supposed to get married that fall," she said. "We argued about stupid things. Napkin colors, music. I thought we had all the time in the world." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Turns out time doesn't care what you think." Mark swallowed hard. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Images surfaced, uninvited. A hospital room washed in fluorescent light, the sound of a monitor going flat, the unbearable quiet that followed. He hadn't planned to say anything, but the words pushed out anyway. "My wife died 8 years ago," he said. "Cancer, fast, too fast." Lena looked up at him, then really looked. And something in her expression softened, not pity but recognition. "Then you know," she said. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. She continued, slower now. "After the accident, people treated me like a tragedy, or a lesson, or worse, like a problem to solve. Dates stopped being dates. They were negotiations. What can you do? What can't you do? How much help do you need?" Her jaw tightened. Eventually, they all reached the same conclusion before saying it out loud. That I was too much work, or not enough life. Mark felt a sharp ache behind his eyes. He crouched slightly, resting his hands on his knees so he was closer to her level. "That's not..." She held up a hand. "I'm not telling you this for reassurance. I'm telling you because I won't pretend anymore. Your sister thought we'd understand each other. Maybe she was right. Maybe she was wrong. But I won't trap you in something you didn't choose with open eyes." Silence stretched between them, heavy but honest. Mark's thoughts raced to Noah waiting for him at home, trusting him to be strong, to the careful routines he'd built to survive, to the fear that had kept him alone long after loneliness had settled into his bones. "I can't give you a simple life," Lena said. "I won't suddenly get better. I'll always need help with some things. There will be stares, awkward questions, hard days. If you walk away right now, I won't think less of you." Mark closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet. "My son asked me last week if I'm lonely," he said. His voice broke on the word. He asked it like a fact, not an accusation, like he already knew the answer. He scrubbed a hand over his face, ashamed of the tears he couldn't stop. I told him no. Because what kind of father admits that? What kind of man tells his kid that love left and never came back? Lena listened without interrupting, her eyes shining. The truth, Mark continued, is that I've been terrified of wanting anything again. Because wanting means risking, and risking means I could lose all over again. He looked at her, really looked and felt the weight of what she was offering him. Not ease, not certainty, but honesty. When you told me your story, it didn't scare me away. It scared me because it felt familiar. Lena's breath hitched. Familiar how? Like standing in the wreckage and realizing you're still alive, he said, and that maybe surviving isn't the same thing as living. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. Finally, Lena reached out, her hand hovering uncertainly before resting against Mark's sleeve. I'm not asking you to save me, she said softly, and I don't want to be someone you feel obligated to stay with. I just want the chance to be chosen. Something inside Mark gave way then, not in a painful snap, but in a slow, necessary break. The walls he'd built to keep grief contained crumbled, and in their place was a raw, aching openness he'd forgotten was possible. He took her hand gently, careful not to grip too tight. I don't know what the future looks like, he said. I don't know how to do this perfectly, but I do know that I don't want to keep hiding from life. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. If you're willing, I'd like to try. Not to fix you, not to be fixed, just to show up, honestly. Lena smiled through tears, a real smile that reached her eyes. That's all I ever wanted, she whispered. Outside, the world kept moving, unaware that two broken people had just chosen hope over fear. Mark stood and offered his arm, not out of obligation but invitation. Lena accepted, and together they moved toward the door, unsure of what came next, but no longer alone in facing it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this to life.